Hello, this video is relevant to any question 3 on paper 2, but if you want to get the most out of it, it might help you to get the June 2018 paper freely available on the AQA website. The first thing that examiners do to try and help you, but could also be to catch you out, is to tell you which lines you need to read on your text, and then they have a very simple language question, which is exactly like the language question on paper 1, question 2. So we go straight to the insert and then we find those relevant lines. Line 18 will be about here, and we just focus on the actual parts of the text that will be examined, because if we quote anything from up here, we get 0 points for that bit of our answer. So there are two things we need to write about: how the language is used to describe the surfers and how the language is used to describe the sea. Well, let's see what a 1 to 3 mark answer would look like. This is approximately equivalent to grades 1 and 2. It isn't a very realistic answer because a student wouldn't write like the examiner, but what the student has missed is what the examiner wants to point out to you. Let's read it and find out. The writer tells us about the surfers by describing what they looked like when they rowed in. She uses the word majestically to show us that they looked majestic. So this is a fabulous embedded quotation, and that's a characteristic of students who are going to get high marks. However, this student has simply repeated what was already in the quotation. That's what I write here as my examiner's commentary for you. Next, the student has correctly identified that majestically is an adverb, but that doesn't gain any extra marks. What will get the marks is explaining what the adverb does to control the reader's thoughts and impressions of the surfers. But instead, the student says, which tells you how they did something. So again, it's just repeating what's in the quotation, and so it can't get any higher marks. Now we'll see how that same student, in this case the examiner, could get grades 3 or 4. Remember, this isn't a full answer, it's just a snapshot of what might be in it. She says, they rowed in majestically. So we still have an embedded quotation, and then the student zooms in on the key word they want to write about. Majestically is an adverb. Brilliant. But that doesn't say anything new that wasn't said before. So it's this section of the answer that is going to give us the higher marks, because it makes the reader think that the surfers are like kings. That's where the marks are. Then they've tried to explain that in more detail, because Your Majesty is what you say to a king. But the explanation doesn't really help. The examiner will already be able to work out that majestically gave the inference of being a king or like a king. The because part should explain why the writer wanted to suggest that they were like kings, what that has to do with surfing itself. So I've now moved that answer up here so you can see it compared to a grades 5 and 6 answer, worth between 7 and 9 marks. The writer uses the adverb majestically to describe the surfers as they ride the waves. So a little bit of extra detail. They're not majestic just because they're on a surfboard. It's the way they ride the waves that makes them appear majestic, which creates an image of the surfers as royalty. So now the student is no longer bluffing about lots of language features. They're getting very specific about this one adverb, majestically. And they've abandoned this longer quotation. They've gone straight in for embedding the single word that's going to give them the explanation they need. Now, this is the first part of the explanation, and this student has a second part explaining the same quotation, emphasizing the idea that the surfers have mastered the sea and are carried along by the waves like a king. So having a two-part explanation gets you into grades 5 and 6. We also have better use of subject terminology. Remember, adverb didn't really give that first student any extra marks because they hadn't explained the effect. However, the words that help you explain the effect are emphasizing and image. These are words that you would always use in any language question or any literature question in your literature exams. That's how you know it's subject terminology. Once again, I brought that answer up to this column so you can compare it to a grade 7, 8 and 9 type of writing. It begins in a similar way. The writer describes the surfers riding majestically on the waves. The adverbs suggesting how dominant the surfers appear. Now what we're going to get here is a longer explanation. 3 or 4 parts would be plenty. However, because it's an examiner, they're going to give us 6. And those 6 explanations are shown in the italics. So the first one was the riders appear dominant and creating the image of regal figures. Second part of the explanation. Riding high above the waves. So their height adds to the idea of their majesty and their dominance. Like Neptune. Now this is a little bit of extra contextual knowledge which you wouldn't be expected to know, but this student has leapt from the idea of majestic being a king. Who's the king of the sea? Well, Neptune is the god of the sea. Those of you studying My Last Duchess will know this and will be able to use this context in your answer. But that's not something we'd expect. So, like Neptune, the mythical god of the sea. The royal image emphasises the confidence, that's our 4th part of the explanation, and assurance, 5th part, and the awe they inspire, 6th part. Now, there are 2 important things to take away from this. Number 1, you need 3 or 4 parts to your explanation, but number 2, you won't have time in the exam to write this as separate sentences. You want to try and put these explanations into the same sentence. That's what the examiner has done here, and then here. Only 2 sentences to get those 6 explanations across. Now you can't do that if you're still writing P or Peel paragraphs. And so to learn how to get rid of P, you want to check out this video here.